Good morning and welcome to this week's episode of Learn with Lorna, episode number 224, where we're looking at the subject of local government reforms to mark 50 years since the 1975 Act came into force. My name is Lorna Steele-McGinn. I'm the Community Engagement Officer with the Highland Archive Service, which has 4 archive centres in the Highlands of Scotland. We look after documents in Inverness, in Wick, in Fort William and in Portree. This series is brought to you by High Life Highland at no cost to the viewer. High Life Highland is a charity registered in Scotland and there's no payment or subscription required to take part in this series. But if you're able to donate towards our work, then we really appreciate that. There's a link to be able to do so in the body of the text that accompanies this video. And donating towards our work enables us to keep providing the range of activities that we do. This week is pre-recorded as I'm busy with Nairn Probus doing a tour of the Archive Centre and a display of documents for them. But this week for Learn with Lorna, we are looking at the subject of a local government reform. Scheduled this week because tomorrow, the 16th of May 2025, marks 25 years since the Local Government Scotland Act 1973 came into effect in 1975. This, as I said last week, is a much more interesting episode than the title might suggest. This is a huge turning point in Scottish administrative history, and from an archival point of view, it is one of the single most important dates that we work with. It's a date that anyone working in local authority archives in Scotland will be familiar with and may well have an opinion on from a record-keeping point of view. As our prime function as the Highland Archive Service, the reason we exist is to care for and give access to the records of local government. It would be a huge miss not to mark this anniversary. If you have ever been on a tour with me, you will have heard me say that as well as being a collecting archive, taking in a wide range of archival material relating to the Highlands, we look after the records of the Highland Council and the predecessors of the Council. And that's what we're talking about today, the predecessors of the Highland Council. What was passed into law in 1973 and was put into practice from 1975 changed the landscape of local government and administration. But what did it replace and why did the change come about? I think we need to start there to make sense of the Act. For centuries, Scotland had been split into counties, sheriffdoms, boroughs and parishes. If we look at the SCAN knowledge base, the Scottish Archive Network knowledge base, for some definitions of these, we get counties, parishes and boroughs. An important process took place from the 12th century onwards, when Scotland was divided into counties, parishes and boroughs. The counties had their origin in the sheriffdoms and stewartries, sheriffs and stewards being the official royal officials and judges. Parishes were originally a way of dividing up the country into small areas, each of which would support a local church and clergy. Boroughs were towns which enjoyed special privileges relating to the regulation of trade and industry and a certain amount of autonomy. From the 17th century until the mid-19th century, local government in Scotland is often characterised as ruled by churches and gentry in parishes and in counties, and by Burgess oligarchy in the boroughs. So we've got the boroughs very much having an autonomous system. They look after their own affairs, they regulate their own affairs and trade. Beyond that, in the smaller areas, we've got the parishes and then the larger areas of the counties. And that reference there, so it says that the boroughs are being ruled by Burgess oligarchy, but then outside that, generally, local government is being administered by church and gentry. Now, that reference to the rule of the gentry refers to the Commissioners of Supply, first appointed in 1667, as a committee of the prominent landowners of each county to collect the land tax, and then gradually, over the years, being given more and more administrative responsibility. So the county, the large units of land within the country, are separated into civil parishes, and these sitting alongside the boroughs, the towns of particular significance for trade. The boroughs, the more urban settlements, more or less regulated themselves, and anyone who's been in Scotland is likely to have seen that many of our ancient boroughs still proudly welcome people with signs that say, welcome to the Royal Borough of Dornoch, or wherever it might be. I'm conscious that I'm saying there are, of course, boroughs in England and elsewhere as well, but I'm talking specifically about Scotland. The boroughs could be of various types. They could be a royal borough, which had been created or kind of promoted or elevated by the Crown, boroughs of regality or barony, which are granted to secular or ecclesiastical leaders, and parliamentary or police boroughs, which were established or converted in the 1800s. So there are different types of boroughs. Before the reforms of the 1970s that we're going to come on and talk about, there were 12 boroughs in Highland, most of which were centuries old. I've done previous episodes on Tain, Dornoch, Dingwall, Nairn, all of which have long histories as seats of local authority. So let's learn a bit more about the boroughs in Highland. The boroughs in the Highlands were variously created over the centuries, either by privileges granted directly by the Crown, known as royal boroughs, of which there were 7 in the Highlands in 1975, or created by subject superiors with permission of the Crown, known as boroughs of barony or regality. In the 19th century, additional parliamentary boroughs or police boroughs were set up by Acts of Parliament. Boroughs became responsible for most aspects of local administration, and between 1833 and 1890, certain statutory functions were carried out by police commissioners, including street cleaning, water supply, as well as conventional policing. Borough Dean of Guild Courts controlled building operations and approved building plans. Most of the responsibilities of these boroughs were transferred to the new district councils under the Local Government Scotland Act 1973. The boroughs in Highland at the point of this legislation were Cromarty, Dingwall, Dornoch, Fortrose, Fort William, Invergordon, Inverness and Kingussie, Nairn, Tain, Thurso and Wick. The borough of Granton was transferred in 1975. So this system then, I know I've gone into some kind of technicality there, but the system basically of counties, parishes and boroughs was centuries old with relatively little change. There were changes in the administration of these, but really relatively small changes. By the time of the first major Local Government Reform Act, the 1889 Local Government Scotland Act. This came into force on the 16th of May, 1890, and established a uniform set of county councils, which took over most of the responsibilities from the Commissioners of Supply. So this is the first big kind of widespread thing that makes a big difference. So for after 1890 onwards, we have the boroughs, largely governing their own affairs, these towns of trade significance, and the county councils governing the affairs of the parishes within their boundaries through district committees. So from the 1889 Act came into force 1890. From then on we have Caithness County Council, Ross and Cromarty County Council, Sutherland County Council, Inverness County Council and Nairn County Council. And those, within Ross and Cromarty, that includes the Isle of Lewis. Within Inverness County Council, that includes Harris, North Uist, South Uist, Barra and Benbecula. From a Highland perspective, it was at this point, it was the enacting of the 1889 Act that the counties of Ross and Cromarty became Ross and Cromarty. There are various ins and outs and shifting of bits of responsibilities at this time, but I'm trying not to bore everyone with a huge amount of legislative detail. So basically, for hundreds of years, around the 12th century onwards until the 1890s, we have boroughs, parishes and counties. In the 1890s, the county councils came in and some of those functions change and transfer. The next really important piece of legislation is the 1929 Local Government Scotland Act, which came into effect on the 15th of May, 1930. It's these 3 important acts we're looking at today all came in on the 15th or 16th of May. This Act, the 1929 Act, introduced joint county councils where the counties would remain separate but they would have a joint council. This happened for Moray and Nairn, and separated the boroughs for the first time into large and small, because up until this point you could have a borough with 40,000 residents or you could have a borough with 1,000 residents and they have very similar rights. So at this point the 1929 Act separates them into large and small boroughs, a population of more or less than 20,000 is the line. The other thing that the 1929 Act did was establish district councils. It was also this Act which abolished the Scottish Poor Law system, handing over the responsibility for this to the county councils and the large boroughs in the guise of public assistance. It was also the 1929 Act that abolished, finally, the Commissioners of Supply. The 1929 Act required the county councils, after some backbench pressure, to set up district councils, dividing those landward areas, i.e. not the boroughs, into smaller segments with some kind of local authority there. Because the feeling otherwise was that there was still too much of a disconnect. Section 1 of the 1947 Local Government Scotland Act neatly summarises the state of affairs by the middle of the 20th century. It says, for the purposes of local government, Scotland shall be divided into counties, counties of cities, which were Edinburgh, Glasgow, Aberdeen and Dundee, large boroughs, small boroughs, and the landward area of every county shall, save as provided in this part of the Act, be divided into districts. So, this has all happened over a 60-odd year period from that 1889 Act through to 1947. There have been some changes, but what we essentially still have is a system of counties covering the big areas, parishes, district level governance, and then the boroughs with their self-governing systems. But all of this would be completely upturned by the passing of the 1973 Act and its implementation in 1975. So why? Why did this happen, and what happened? And why is it such a key date for those of us who work in local authority archives? Why is this the Act that we talk about and think about? There were discussions about the need for reform from the 1950s, 1960s onwards, because at this point, by the 1960s, these are the levels of administration of local government in Scotland. Scotland is being run at this point by 37 county councils, including 4 joint county councils, 4 county of city corporations, so Edinburgh, Glasgow, Aberdeen and Dundee, 21 large boroughs running their own affairs, 176 small boroughs, and 196 district councils. There are over 400 separate authorities operating in local government with overlapping functions, with huge variations in responsibilities and power depending on the area. In 1963, the Conservative government published a white paper entitled The Modernisation of Local Government in Scotland, of which we hold a copy. And it includes a summary of the structure as it stood at that point in 1963. And I'm going to read a fairly long extract to you because I think it really emphasises or really illustrates the variations of responsibility. From our perspective, looking back at it, it looks hugely confusing, the number of layers and responsibilities and different functions. So this is from that government white paper in 1963. The present system of local government in Scotland was established by the Act of 1929, which had 2 principal aims: to simplify local government by reducing the number of different kinds of authority, and secondly, to replace authorities exercising single functions by multi-purpose authorities covering a defined area and elected by inhabitants in that area. The powers of the various types of authority are as follows. In the 4 counties of city, the town council is responsible for administering all local government services in that area. In the large boroughs, broadly speaking with populations over 20,000, the town council is responsible for most functions. The main exceptions are education, valuation for rating, and in some cases police, which are administered by the county council. In the small boroughs, the town council is responsible for a number of important functions, including housing, water, sewage, lighting and cleansing. But another large group of functions is performed within the borough by the county council. This general principle being that the county council should undertake those functions which require greater resources or are more efficiently discharged over a wide area. In the landward areas of the county council is responsible for all the main work of local government. The landward area is also divided into districts, and the district councils carry out certain minor duties in their own right, mostly concerned with local amenities, and they may also exercise powers which are delegated to it by the county council. Town councils in the cities and boroughs are directly elected. County councils are directly elected as regards the landward area, but the boroughs within the county nominate members to serve on the county council. Borough representatives on the county council can exercise a deliberative vote only on matters affecting functions which the county council exercises in the borough. County councils for the landward area are ex officio members of the appropriate district councils. Members of the district council are otherwise directly elected. Town councils are the rating authorities in the cities and the boroughs. The county councils are the rating authorities in the landward areas, and requisition on the town councils to meet the cost of services which they discharge within the borough. District councils requisition on the county council for their expenditure, but the rate levied in each district is that needed to meet the requisition of particular district councils. So, as I said, a long and complex section, but I think that it just really illustrates the number of agencies involved and how in some places the county council holds a responsibility, in other places the borough council does, depending on the size of the borough. There might be certain functions that the borough council does or the county council does, and then the district councils are there as well. And as I say, from our perspective looking back, there's just such a huge number of people and bodies involved. So that was the 1963 white paper put forward by the Conservative government. In 1966, Harold Wilson, the Labour Prime Minister, announced in the House of Commons that there would be a royal commission to review this question. Really, not once and for all, but there was a feeling that several years had elapsed since this white paper and that now it was the time to review it again. The Royal Commission was led by Lord Wheatley, who was the MP for Edinburgh East, and it included 9 members, men and women, including MPs and local government representatives from right across Scotland, as well as other individuals such as Patrick Connor, who was the regional officer for Scotland for the Amalgamated Engineering Union, or Henry Ballantyne, who was the managing director of Ballantyne's Knitwear in Innerleithen. The Highlands were represented by David Russell Johnson, Liberal MP for Inverness. And we hold a copy of the Wheatley report, that report published in 1969 after extensive consultation. It notes at the beginning their process of how they had gone about gathering information. They spent 207 days together in consultation as a committee, including 59 days visiting local authorities from Shetland to Stranraer, Stornoway to St Boswells. They spent 19 days hearing evidence in public. They went to London to look at the London boroughs and the Greater London Council to see how that worked. They went to Norway, Sweden, Denmark and the Faroe Islands because those places were frequently highlighted to them as models of governance when they were gathering evidence. They went to the International Union of Local Authorities at The Hague. And the Wheatley report makes absolutely fascinating reading. I was genuinely completely absorbed in it. And again, you wouldn't think that a report of a Royal Commission into local government would be hugely exciting and inspiring, but I found it really fascinating. It opens with the sentence, "Something is seriously wrong with local government in Scotland." And it says that it's not so much that services have stopped functioning, it's more that they've stayed the same when everything else around them has changed. The report details the strengths and weaknesses of the system with counties, boroughs and the district councils as it stood in 1969. It describes it rather nicely as the counties are the patches of the quilt and the boroughs are the beads that form the pattern. So it includes various positives and negatives of the system as it is. So for instance, it says the advantages are that the system is holding up to change. It hasn't collapsed. The system, importantly, preserves traditional and cultural links of great value. Many of these boroughs have been around since the 1100s, and that has to count for something. Another advantage, they say, is that it could possibly be fixed by allocating money to the system rather than changing the whole structure of it. But there are weaknesses, and the weaknesses are it's missing a middle tier. So there are county councils are wielding a big amount of power, and so are borough town councils, but there's a missing layer in the middle for the landward areas. It said another weakness was the separation of functions which made sense together. So, for instance, in the small boroughs, they were responsible for housing, but they weren't responsible for health and welfare, which logically could go together. They noted another weakness, that the framework is archaic and that the people didn't know or care about the role of local government. How could they fix that? And also they note that there's a problem in the relationship with central government. The Wheatley report then goes on to detail the objectives of the proposed reform. What are their priorities in reforming local government if they go ahead with it? And they put 4 things down. Their priorities were to give power, to distribute power, effectiveness, local democracy, and local involvement. The Wheatley report then goes on to examine all of the local government functions. So planning, roads, education, health, housing, police, fire, environmental services, arts, libraries, museums, recreational spaces, etc., etc. It really illustrates just how much is in the control of local government. So it looks in at all of those functions. How are they operating? How could they be changed? Before looking at the final approach and the transitional considerations that would need to be taken into account. And the final approach proposed by the Wheatley Commission was to create a 2-tier system of local government made up of large regions and smaller district councils. I was really, really interested to see in the Wheatley report that the Wheatley report suggested that the Highland Islands should include the Western Isles, Orkney and Shetland Islands. But that Russell Johnson and Miss Harvey Anderson both opposed this. They both said that that Shetland should form its own entity, so should Orkney and so should Western Isles. Similarly, it was the same 2 people who argued that the majority of Argyll should sit with Strathclyde rather than Highland, but that a small portion of Argyll should come to Highland. In both cases, they were very much in the minority, these 2, but they put in notes of reservation, which were published with the report. So the majority of the Commission members didn't agree with it, but these 2 said that the Shetland Islands, the Orkney Islands and the Western Isles should be 3 separate entities, and that the bulk of Argyll should go to Strathclyde, with a little bit coming to Highland. In both cases, as I say, very much in the minority in the committee. But their notes of reservation were published along with the Wheatley report. And in the end, those 2 ended up being successful in both of their arguments, because when the new local authority system came into being on the 16th of May 1975, Western Isles, Orkney Islands and Shetland Islands became 3 separate single-tier authorities. They didn't need to have a region and districts. They just were an entity to themselves. When the Act was passed, Scotland was then split into 3 island areas, those 3, 9 regions comprising 53 districts. From a Highland point of view, this meant the creation of the Highland region, 1 entity, which comprised 8 districts: Badenoch and Strathspey, Caithness, Inverness, Lochaber, Nairn, Ross and Cromarty, Skye and Lochalsh, and Sutherland. And the functions of these were as follows. The Regional Council was given responsibility for education, roads and transport, social work, water and sewerage, planning, economic and industrial development, the European Community, consumer protection and trading standards, libraries and leisure services. The functions of police, fire services, valuation and electoral registration were exercised through joint committees with the adjoining island authorities. Within Highland Region, 8 district authorities were created to provide more local services, in contrast to the large-scale strategic services provided by the Highland Regional Council. The main responsibilities of the district councils were housing, environmental services, local licensing. They shared with the region powers over recreation and leisure provision and industrial development. It was at this point in 1975, sorry, I had a complete mental blank there about the date. It was at this point in 1975 that Granton and Spey Borough and Cromdale Parish became part of Highland, as did the 4 north parishes of Argyll, Ardgour, Lismore and Appin, Ardnamurchan and Morven. and the rest of Argyll went to Strathclyde. The other big key point from a Highland perspective that came about with the 1975 Act or 1973 Act was that the islands of Lewis, Harris, North Uist, South Uist and Barra left Inverness-shire and Ross and Cromarty to form the new Western Isles Authority. And that's why there are sometimes places where records might be with us or they might be with Western Isles. Murray, which had been a joint county council with Nairn, went to Grampian region and Nairn stayed with Highland. Tongue and Far initially went into Caithness, but then moved into Sutherland. And it was a huge, huge change. And I know that I'm kind of listing lots of little facts and lots of little dates and responsibilities and things. But this is an enormous system change because for, nearly 800-ish years, the boroughs, counties and parishes have existed. And then in one fell swoop, all of that is swept away. I had said to my manager, who is famously the expert on local authority, that it feels like, when I was looking more into it, it feels like that the civil version of the disruption, that huge change of life in the church in the 1840s. And I was half joking, but really it was huge, that those structures that had been in existence for centuries just disappeared. The counties and the boroughs were abolished. So the impact on places which had held borough status since the 1100s, like Inverness, was immense because all of that just dispersed. There are still elements of the borough structure that remain, but all of the ability for that self-autonomy and local governments within the borough boundaries had gone. I found a letter from William Ross, Secretary of State for Scotland, written on the 12th of May 1975, which I found in the county of Nairn. And it says, reorganisation of local government, and I assume this was sent to every town council and county council. At this time, on the eve of the most far-reaching reorganisation ever undertaken in the history of local government in Great Britain, it is fitting to pay tribute to all of those who have served with the authorities now about to go out of existence. Through their work, services have built up of a scope and quality of which we in Scotland can be proud. I would like, on behalf of all of us, to thank the present authorities for the work they have done for the benefits of their communities. Tribute must also be paid to these associations and other organisations which make up the local government scene in Scotland. Their contribution in the past has been invaluable, and I know I can rely on them to continue their work in the future with the new authorities. I'm sure that all those who are going on to serve in the new authorities, members and officers alike, will strive to uphold that ideal of public service which has so characterised local government in Scotland. And this new, totally different two-tier system came into being on the 16th of May 1975 after a run-in period with a shadow authority. I looked at the last minutes of the county councils and the borough town councils, and I found them really moving. Almost all of them, their final entry in the volume is about the fact that this is the last meeting of the town council or the county council, and recording their thanks to those who have served that community over the years. This extract is from the minutes of a meeting held in Dornoch Borough Town Council, held on the 14th of May 1975. Provost H. Clooney reported that this was the last statutory meeting of the Town Council prior to the reorganisation of local government on the 15th of May 1975. It was a sad occasion that now, after all these past centuries, the borough would no longer be responsible for the running of their own affairs. The Provost remarked on the very valuable and unselfish service given by the members of the Town Council, past and present, and thanked them for their friendship and their support. The Provost also thanked the Town Clerk, officials, staff and borough staff for their assistance over the years. The Honorary Treasurer, E.K. Cartwright, then rose, and as the oldest serving member of the Council next to the Provost, spoke on behalf of all the members and staff about the unusually happy relationship that had existed between the members and the Provost, to the wonderful service he had given to the community and to the county, unselfishly and willingly. The Provost had always had the interests of the residents of the borough at heart and had served them well. He would be sadly missed as Provost of this royal borough. On turning to the minutes of the newly formed or of the shadow authority and then of the regional council and the district councils, I found all that you might expect. References to organisations coming into being, standing orders, deciding what they're going to discuss at meetings, allocating roles, recruitment for different roles, everything that is required to step in to authority. Sticking with Dornoch Borough for a second, the other thing I did was go and look at the third statistical account. These were published in the 1950s and 1960s, but some of them were updated in the 1980s. So I looked at all the boroughs to find one that had been updated after this Act came about. And I found that the Dornoch section had been updated in 1986, and I found this reflection there. The most far-reaching changes in the parish took place as a result of the Local Government Scotland Act of 1975. Dornoch Town Council was abolished, Sutherland County Council became Sutherland District Council, and its area was increased by the addition of Kincardine Parish, that's Tongue and Far. However, the functions of the new District Council were much reduced, and the other functions were given to a new body, Highland Regional Council, with headquarters in Inverness. The major local government functions of roads and transport, water and sewerage, education, leisure and recreation, planning and social work all became regional functions, and the District Council was left with housing, environmental health, waste disposal, amenities and a limited amount of leisure and recreation in those situations where region and district had a joint locus. In 1982, central government decreed that leisure and recreation should now be left wholly to district councils, but Highland region contrived to maintain an interest in this function by creating a leisure and libraries department. Our leading parish historian has this to say about the abolition of the town council. In 1975, Dornoch ceased to be a royal borough after being granted its royal charter in 1628. There remains among those who live in this parish a sadness, tinged with bitterness at being deprived of a 350-year-old heritage, a bitterness almost as deep as that following the evictions of the last century. The pros and cons of the 1975 changes are still being debated, but there is still a question of how much the inevitable centralisation has helped peripheral areas such as Sutherland. It is only fair to note, however, that the Highland region has made considerable capital input into the Royal Borough in establishing in Dornoch a new divisional headquarters for the police, the water board, as well as considerably improving the amenity of the square. And it's just a really interesting reflection. Written in 1986, they've had 10 years to think about it. That loss of the borough heritage and the wariness about the centralisation. But it does say at the end there some of the positives that the Highland Regional Council had delivered. And the other thing that the Regional Council did in 1990 was to establish the Highland Archive Service. But change was to come again with the passing of the Local Government Scotland Act 1994, which, when it came into force in 1996, replaced the regional councils and the district councils across Scotland with 29 new single-tier unitary authorities. The 3 island councils, the Orkney Islands, Shetland Islands and Western Isles, remained unchanged, but everything else became single unitary authorities. And this was the creation of the Highland Council as it exists today. The Highland Council covering 1/3 of Scotland's land area and 1/10 of the UK's. In the publication 21 Years of Highland Regional Council, the outgoing authority noted that at the time of the handover in 1996, Highland Regional Council was employing over 10,500 people and was dispensing an annual budget in excess of £300 million. But I want to finish by sharing a thought about what reorganisation meant and means from an archive perspective. The reorganisation that came in 1975, and that remained until 1996 when the Highland Council came in, created some archive services across Scotland, including us. So that's one change that this Act brought. But records are always at risk at times of change and handover, both in local government and in other settings. At any time where there is change, responsibilities are changed or transferred, People leave jobs, new people come into jobs, buildings are closed and sold. People are looking forward and not looking backward. And at that point, there is a danger to the records of the outgoing regime or person or authority, whatever context it is. There is a danger that the records generated by the outgoing will be destroyed or lost or overlooked or thrown in the bin because the incoming either doesn't see the value or isn't aware of them, of their existence. And most of our most commonly used and valued collections, like the Borough and County Council minutes, poor relief records, school logbooks and admission registers, planning documents, valuation rolls, all of these exist because of the care taken to preserve them at a time of reorganisation, either by individuals within the local government or by legislation. The 1973 Act makes specific reference to the importance of protecting archival collections, and I found reference to this within the collections of the outgoing county councils as well. There's an awareness of the risk to records at this point, and there's a concerted effort to try and gather in and protect the archival heritage of the boroughs and the counties and the parishes. Archives provide evidence. They provide evidence of people, of events, and of decisions. And the protection of these documents and the access to them is paramount, particularly at periods of change. So I hope you found that interesting. I know in a way it's a dry subject, but it is absolutely fundamental to who we are, why we exist, how we exist, and decisions that have been taken governing all of our lives in the past. So thank you for joining me for this episode of Learn with Lorna. Next week, I will be looking at the story of Inverness Harbour. A reminder that this series is brought to you by High Life Highland at no cost to the viewer. That High Life Highland is a charity registered in Scotland, and there's no payment or subscription required to take part in this series. But if you're able to donate towards our work and help us carry on doing all the different things that we do, then we really, really appreciate that. Thank you.